Hey, what's up everyone? Today I'm gonna walk you through how I made my song Rise, what inspired me, and how it eventually turned out. Now, Rise was a project I started Christmas Day after I got my interface, my headphones. I was inspired to make something, so I went on Splice and I found these vocals right here.
I can hear whispers from far away. I can hide, but I'll try. I see the walls are caving in.
And so what's great about these vocals is they're kind of more mystical. I've had bad experiences with vocals on Splice, but these ones are okay. And then, so this was, I added some OTT, saturation, fresh air, and some EQ. And then down here I added some reverb to make a wet layer. And so the advantage of having a separate track for the wets and a separate track for the dries is it's easy to mix. Nowadays, I usually don't have two tracks, I only have one. But back then, this is what I decided was the best idea. Now, of course, Rise wouldn't be Rise without the ambience layer. So I have two ambiences here. And these are several different layers. You know, we have the melodic ambience, we have the rain sounds, we have some background elements. Of course, we have the melodic pads. And then down here, we have another pad that comes in during the intro, which sounds like this. This is stock Logic, by the way, because they have Logic Pro has some amazing stock soundscapes. I would really recommend if you make music using Logic Pro to check these out because some of them are really good. So anyway, so the intro sounds like this, and of course we have some down sweeps right here. And then, so this is what it sounds like. And then this will eventually transition into the intro. And now what does the intro have? Well, first we have this Steinway grand piano. Very crisp, a lot of OTT, some EQ, but for the most part, this is how it comes in Logic. It's the Steinway grand piano. I use the piano most of the time. It's either this one or the Bose. I don't know how to pronounce it. Bose, you know what I mean. The B one, the B piano. And then the B piano, because that one's more soft, but this one's much more punchy. And I like that a lot. And then I mentioned the pads already, but then you get these nice little Foley elements. And these ones are like synths that are like, these ARPs that are like EQ'd in, like right here. And I actually added this much later on, like only a couple weeks before I released the song, because I was kind of worried that the song didn't sound interesting enough. And then right here we have this like little thing I got from Splice, this little trill. And then of course down here we have a glockenspiel loop. And so then these play throughout the song just to add a little more texture to the song. And I think, because otherwise I was worried the song would sound too boring. But then one thing the intro does add is these two things, which are really cool. The first one is, this was actually one of the first things I added when I made the song. Before I even add the piano, right when I got the vocal, I added this little thing. And what this is basically just, I think, a square wave in Serum that I added Valhalla Supermassive to. And what's great about Valhalla Supermassive in its preset form is that it just adds this really cool textural delay. And I think Valhalla Supermassive makes the song sound much more futuristic than, let's say, a stock Logic plugin like Space Designer, which I use Space Designer a lot, but with synths, I prefer Valhalla Supermassive. And then we have the bass right here, which is just a respace that I cut the highs and boosted the lows. And so this just adds a lot of low end to the thing. So I don't have a sub or anything. And then we have these transitional vocals, which are really cool. And so then this kind of acts like an impact. And speaking of impacts, right here, which eventually will lead into the verse, we have, and this is just a Cashmere with OTT and some EQ. And so anyway, how the intro sounds together is, And then eventually it leads into this piano melody right here, which will eventually be the main lead of the drop. And that just adds a nice little, melody. And what I love about the intro to Rise is that I made it so that, this is not necessarily a good thing, but to me, I like how you can only, when you listen to Rise in different settings, every time you're going to hear something new. You're going to hear either the trills, you're going to hear the ambience, you're going to hear the piano melody. And then when we eventually hit the verse, we get some drums, and these drums are just, I think, reverbed and EQ'd cymatics samples. And so for the kick, I use Valhalla Supermassive. For the snare, I use Space Designer. Because Space Designer, like I mentioned earlier, sounds much more natural than Valhalla Supermassive. And then I don't think I added any more elements besides the drums to the intro, to the verse. But then eventually transitions into the build-up, and we have the kick changes the pattern to, and then goes over here, and then we also get a 909 snare. I use this 909 snare all the time. It's from Splice, and it just EQ'd so that it slowly raises the high end. And many melodic dubstep producers use a style like this in their build-ups. And then eventually goes back down for the drop to act kind of like a fill. And then we of course have the snare right before the drop. This is the one from the intro. And then we have our risers right here. And so that sounds pretty cool. And then so the build up pretty much together sounds like this. And I would just like to use this as a time to say how perfect the vocal fits here. I did chop it up, but the rise part makes just a seemingly great build up. It naturally by itself makes a great build up, and I'm really glad I found it. Next, now finally we're at the time everyone's been waiting for, which is the drop. Now the drop is very intricate because it's melodic dubstep, of course. There's a lot of layers, a lot of stuff is going on here. So I think I just start with I'm gonna start probably with the drums. So first we have these kicks right here. So we have a cymatics dubstep kick, and then we have a terror kick, and then together they sound like this. And these of course have saturation, limiting, OTT, very little OTT by the way, and Diablo Light. Yeah, don't put a lot of OTT in our kick, so it would sound terrible. But then you have your snares, and of course this one's from Splice. This one's cool because it has kind of like a hay sound, which is interesting. You don't hear that often. And then a reverb cymatic snare, because it wouldn't be melodic dubstep without reverb in the snares. Next, so together the kick and the snares sound like this. So it's just that it repeats that pattern with all the melodic parts. And then eventually we get to the reverse snare. That just adds a lot more tension to the drop. And I don't do it every snare, I do it every other snare, because if we did every snare, it would get tiring on the ears. And then we have the crash. And the crash just follows the kick, because I think having a crash following the kick results in a more high-end sound whenever the kick hits, and it can kind of trick the brain into thinking, oh, I hear a crash, that means the kick's happening, and it can add a lot more punchiness to the kick. And a lot of producers, you do have the crash follow the kick, and then you just have a simple ride from cymatics. I use this ride almost everywhere. And that just follows every offbeat rhythm. And then we have our sidechain kick right here, so this kick's muted, but it follows every time the kick and the snare happen, and so then I can route everything to this sidechain, and that way it would work. And I have really heavy sidechain in the song, as you'll hear soon. But then next we also have this white noise right here, which follows the kick and the snare, just creating more energy. And these glitches, which I chopped up from Splice. And then we have this one right here, which sounds pretty cool. Now finally, so in total, I'm just gonna play all this stuff together. So this is what all the drums plus the glitches sound like. So they're not bad drums. I'm pretty happy with the way I mix them. I mean, some of them is a little unorthodox, but you know, it works. Now next we have our ambient layer, which is just the ambience from the intro, but with the sidechain and OTT. And then of course I leave space when the chords stop, because I only really want this as a layer when the chords are playing. And then you got your vocals. And the only difference here is sidechain. It's very low sidechain. It's like 30%, 30 to 40. I think it's like 38%. So it only ducks down a volume 38%, but it does add a nice bounce to the vocals. So finally, well, first also I'd like to bring up this fill. This only happens in the first part of the song. You don't hear this again until the second melodic drop. Well, it's the third drop, the second melodic dubstep drop. And so that just is a cool little snare I found. It was originally supposed to be a fill, but I liked it better right before the chords hit, along with the kick, you know, hitting. So finally we get to the chords. Now the chords, of course, are intricate. I don't make my chords like this anymore. I use a lot of these aspects. Like I use the same chaos saws, I use the choir, I use the super saw, but I don't no longer use the super pads or the vital chords. The pad is now replaced with a different pad I made a long time ago, like right when I first got Serum, that I never used anymore, but I decided by adding OTT, it sounds really cool. It kind of has like a call on me sound from Seven Lions. And then I don't use the vital chords anymore, so now I only use 4 layers instead of 5. But anyway, the first layer is the chaos chords, which use chaos modulation and Serum. I got this from Ash from Bedroom and Baker. I'm going to shout that guy out because a lot of this, I wouldn't have learned a lot of this without him. The chaos saws, this formula, this song specifically follows a lot of what he does. But in general, the chaos saws and 2 of the bass, one of his mid basses, one of his subs, I use all the time, even nowadays. And even though this song is more, I was kind of just following in terms of the chord stacks, how he made it, I still use those 3 things, the chaos saws, the mid bass, and the sub all the time in almost all my melodic up songs now. But anyway, the chaos sounds sound like this. And it's a really cool harsh sound. They're an octave up than the intro piano, but not every chord is an octave up. These chords specifically are an octave up. And of course, I have it 2 audio tracks, 1 pan to the left, 1 pan to the right, to make it kind of more stereo. Even though it's not really stereo, it sounds more stereo, it sounds wider. And on this, I have a lot of things. I have OTT, Overdrive, Ozone Imager. I have a lot. I think it's, holy cow, it's like 100%. That's some crazy. So it's very wide, a very stereo chord. And then saturation, channel EQ, and of course sidechain. I'll use this as an excuse to show the sidechain. I use Duck. I love Duck. I got it Black Friday. I have a 100% sidechain right now. And funny story, the reason I got Duck was for the crossover feature, because I wanted it to be able to cut the low ends but not cut the highs, because I didn't actually like the sound of sidechain. I thought sidechain ruined the song. But then, now that when I first tried Duck out, I realized I actually really like having that, like that meatiness, like the instant, like the disappear right when the kick hits, and then boom, a big audio sound. And so that's why I don't use the crossover feature at all. Like I got Duck for the crossover feature, and I don't use it. I just like using it in, I just like using the main knob. But yeah, so that Duck sound every time the kick and the snare hits. Next we have vital chords, which is I think a saw with some reverb, some OTT. A lot of the things I use, a lot of you lose a lot of distortion, OTT, stuff like that. Next we have the super pad, which was a refurbished super saw from a while ago. But then what I just did is add automation on the wavetable position and hyperdimension, because hyperdimension has a really cool sound. And I think that adds a lot of thickness, or like modulation inside the song. The next we have the super saw. Most people say don't use super saws. I say do whatever you want. But I personally like using layering super saws with my chaos saws. I don't like having just super saws because it kind of doesn't sound good. But if you layer it, you get a lot of medium frequencies inside super saws and a valley-ness you just don't get with chaos saws. And this is literally just literally just a 16 unison. My CPU can handle it, so I do it. 16 unison saw waves, 16 voices, and then I just added overdrive, OTT, ozone imager, and then of course EQ. And then finally we have the choir. Now I use choir all the time, and the reason you use choir is because you can really get that nice, once like I mentioned earlier with the superstar, you get a nice valley-ness. And for some reason I did put distortion on the choir. I don't do that anymore. Though I'm not gonna lie, it does sound pretty good, but I usually nowadays only put OTT and I don't put distortion on the choir. But anyway, together the chords sound like this. And before my CPU gives out on me, what's cool about these chords is that you can hear kind of everything. You can definitely hear the chaos saws, those are the main chords, but you definitely hear the choir, you definitely hear the super saw. And of course nowadays why I stopped using vital chords and super pads is because they didn't affect it as much as I liked it to, and so I switched to alternatives that I think helped the sound better. But it gets the job done. Now next I'd like to talk about the white noise right here, which is just white noise. I am doing double white noise. I don't do that anymore. I usually only use one white noise, but I have white noise following the chords and I have white noise following the drums, so it worked out though. And then we have 3 leads. Here's the first one. This I got from, I think, also from Ash. And then we have this one. And then finally this one. I got this one like, I want to say right after I got Serum, because I made this thing. This was one of the first sounds I made. And and it's a very like 7 linesy kind of melodic dubstep sound. It's very distorted, and I like it a lot. I don't use it as much as I'd like to, but it's a good background element. It's together. And so finally, we have our basses. Now the basses, I use 3 layers, 2 mid basses, 1 sub. The first one, like I mentioned earlier, I got this one from Ash. It's just he calls it a poop bass. I just call it a toilet bass because we're dignified in this household. The next I have this one. I got this one from Dragonis, a tutorial a long time ago for his, not a long time ago, but a while ago for his Fiora, one of his melodic dubstep tutorials. And I use it a lot. I added OTT and Bit Crusher, so. And what I like is that I made sure that no 2 basses should sound similar if you're layering them. They should sound totally different, and these 2 do have like different valley-ness. This one's more wide, this one's more narrow, so it adds nice frequency range. And then we have the sub finally. I love this sub. I got this one from Ash's melodic bass video, I want to say. Because even though it's not melodic dubstep, you can still learn a lot. And then, so together, those are the basses. Together, the basses sound like this. And you may notice it doesn't really match up with the chords, but together they sound fine. So to just give you a preview of the drop, if you haven't listened to it already. And so that's basically what it sounds like. I don't want to play it more because right now I'm running OBS and Logic Pro with all these many layers. My computer is having a panic attack. But anyway, after the drop hits, you eventually go straight into the second build-up. And the only difference between the second build-up and the first build-up is this riser right here. And I use this to show that we're transitioning from a melodic aspect to a non-melodic aspect, because it can be a shock to just throw dubstep right in the middle of a song. Now, I wish I wish I was that good at dubstep to do that. But basically, you have, for the dubstep drop, same ambience, just not chopped up. We have the sub right here. And the sub's always playing when another bass is playing. But anyway, first we have this bass right here. And this just repeats 3 times. And then has a key change. And then finally we have the main bass right here. And that's basically it, just 2 growl sounds, and that I just use different automations for the LFO rate. And so you get a pretty cool sound. The LFO rate doesn't always work though. Sometimes it's a little wonky. But anyway, I use a different drum pattern instead of using the ba-cha, like ba-cha, ba-cha, something. I kind of just use the ba-cha, da-cha. Kind of like that. And so that way you get more of a simpler sound, because I'm not going to make dubstep with a weird drum pattern. But anyway, it sounds like this. And after this, you go to the next intro, and that's pretty much just the same thing, same build up and everything. And then you go to the second drop, the second melodic drop, and the only difference is that there's a different lead melody. Instead of going down, it goes up. And that's just a great way to round off a song, I think, having a second drop with a different melody. Because it can kind of, it does tell a story in a way. But anyway, the third drop actually sounds like this. I don't know if you guys can see my CPU usage right here, but it's completely skyrocketed whenever I play this song. But anyway, eventually we have this intro, the outro. We just, use the same elements, but eventually fades out. And all that sounds pretty cool. So, thank you guys for watching. I hope you learned something today. If you're wondering how I released it through DistroKid. If you use the link in the description, you can get a discount. I recommend using the second subscription, like the second cheapest, like not the cheapest, not the most expensive, but then one in the middle. That way you get all the perks. That's what I currently have. It's only like $4 a month, which is insanely cheap, by the way. And I would just recommend getting it. And thank you for watching. I'll probably release more music and more videos soon, and I hope you enjoyed. See ya.